Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Beyond expanding your own office, are there any really big, potentially overlooked growth opportunities for private dentists and private dentistry in the 2020s, over the next 10 years? Well, yes, there are, and that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode of Dental Business RX. And I firmly believe that if you take advantage of what's happening in the industry right now, which I'm going to explain, and you do it quickly, that you can build your own little empire and a great future for you, your family, and your team. And I should note that what I'm going to be covering, right, doesn't just apply to doctors who currently own a practice. If you're an associate doctor, you can definitely use this information to take advantage of these growth opportunities that I'll be discussing and build your future. My name is Jeff Blumberg, and I'm your host. And to properly explain this opportunity, I'm going to have to set the scene in dentistry right now, what's happening in the industry. And I want to start by looking, with some statistics and demographics. And I want to start by looking at what is not growing, specifically practice ownership. So I want to read this to you. It's from the ADA Health Policy Institute Analysis of Distribution of Dentists Survey and Survey of Dental Graduates. That was a mouthful. But here's the quote. It says this: practice ownership amongst dentists in private practice has been declining over the years, dropping from 84.7% in 2005, that's 84.7% in 2005, to 73% in 2021. So practice ownership over the last 16 years has dropped by over 10%. All right, fair enough. But where is this being affected? I'm going to give you another little bit of statistics here. And I know this doesn't translate well with a podcast, but it's important I give them to you. I just covered some of this in our recent presentation at our annual owners conference. But let me roll this through for you. It's a graph, and I'm going to have all these links up on the episode webpage. But it's a graph, and it shows by age group who owns a practice from 2005 to 2021. In other words, what percentage of doctors under 30 owned a practice in 2005 versus that percentage now, right? And what percentage of doctors between the ages of 30 and 34 owned a practice in 2005 and now, all right? So let me start. I'm going to give you the bottom of this graph and the top of this graph. So I'm going to start at the bottom. Dentists under 30. In 2005, 25.4% of dentists under 30 years of age owned a dental practice. So about a quarter of them. Now, what is that number in 2021? 9.5%, less than 10%. That number is down by over 15%. So we went from 25% in 2005 to 9.5% in 2021. That's for doctors under 30. What about dentists 30 to 34 years of age? Well, in 2005, 55%, over half of the doctors between the ages of 30 and 34 owned a dental practice. What is that number now in 2021? 34.2%, about a third. So that number is down by 20%. All right. And then that's the bottom of the graph. And then we have the ages in between, 45, etc. But let's take a look at the upper tier of this for a second. And you'll see why this becomes important later. So dentists 65 and over has gone from 85% in 2005 to 84.4% in 2021. It's relatively unchanged. So doctors 65 years of age and older, 84.4% of those own a dental practice. What about the 55 to 64 age bracket? Well, back in 2005, 93.4% of these doctors owned a practice, and now 90.1%. So again, not affected that dramatically. So what this shows you is that the majority of the doctors who are 55 and over own a dental practice, whereas when you start getting into the lower tiers of the age demographic, less and less of these doctors are owning offices. And as a gross, and as a net volume or net percentage, we have a 10% drop overall in dentists owning a dental practice. Now, why? Why is this? I mean, I can only give you, I don't have like a specific survey of, 20,000 new graduates or whatever. I can just base this off of my conversations with newer graduates. Maybe you had your own reasons. You're probably a dentist listening to this. Maybe you do or don't own a practice. Maybe you bought it when you were 35 or 40. what I'm hearing more often than not is two major reasons. One, I wanted to get some experience before I owned an office. Okay. And number two, I'm hearing debt, a lot of debt. They're in a ton of student debts. They're not comfortable taking a $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 loan to buy a dental practice. And to give you an idea, like where is this at now with the debt? You may or may not be familiar with the current numbers. Maybe you graduated 10 years ago and you haven't been as familiar with what tuition is now. But pulled this stuff up recently. It was quite amazing. Right now, for NYU, as an example, if you're the class of 23 in NYU, you can expect to spend between tuition, which is about $400,000, and living expenses, interest, etc. You can expect to spend $673,000 on your education. That's for the class of 23. If you're in the class of 24, you can expect to spend almost $706,000. This is everything, right? This isn't just tuition. Tuition's about $400,000. The rest is living expenses, interest, etc. Right? So that's NYU. What about other schools? So I picked two at random. One was Tufts. Tufts estimates, and this is directly from the Tufts site, and I'll put all these links up on the episode webpage. Tufts estimate about almost $555,000 for your entire dental education. All right. And then if you go to Indiana University, IU estimates, if you're an in-state student, they estimate $320,000. If you're from out of state, it's about $525,000. So what's our average here? You're looking at least $500,000 for your dental education or more, depending on where you go to school. Now, as a point of comparison, Dr. Winteregg, many of you know, you may remember, who was a partner here at the company. When Greg graduated from Indiana University in 1981, his total student debt, and this is for everything, undergrad and dental school, was $40,000. $40,000. And if you were to extrapolate that, $1981 to today using the inflation calculator on the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, I'll put a link in there if you want to play with it. That's about $127,000, almost $128,000. If you took that $40,000 from 81 and you brought it to today, which is a lot different than $350,000 or $400,000, $500,000, $600,000. So maybe, this is one of the bigger reasons. The prospect of going into more debt and the idea that you're going to have to service this debt doesn't seem super exciting for a new grad. Again, this is anecdotal based on conversations I had, also my own understanding of it. So now what are most of these doctors going to do? Well, of course, they're going to go associate. Maybe they're going to go associate for a private office. Or maybe they're going to go work for a DSO, which is a trend we've seen picking up over the last, however many years. As a matter of fact, the last numbers we have on this from the ADA was from 2019, but from 15 to 19, the number of dentists affiliated with a DSO went from 8.8% to 10.4%. What I found interesting was there was a survey of dental students, seniors specifically in 2020, and this survey found, again, this is a comparison to 2015, so from 15 to 20. In 2015, 12% of dentists planned on joining a DSO, coming out of school. And that number for dental school seniors in 2020 went up to 30%, which is not a big shocker. DSOs recruit very heavily in dental schools. And you know this, especially if you're a newer grad, you've seen it because they need dentists. This is what's going on. And look, I'm not going to trash the DSOs. There are there's some people I've talked to in that industry that I appreciate and respect. And I've seen some DSOs that I really don't have the time of day for. But ideally, long term, I don't think it's a successful model for dentistry in general. I think that the private practitioner is the successful model long term. There's always going to be a market for private dentists. And truthfully, there's always going to be a market for dentists. I wasn't planning on getting into this, but if you look at the number of dentists in the U.S. between 2021 and 2022, the number changed by 810. We didn't add that many doctors to the profession. We went from, I think it was 201,117 practicing dentists in 2021 to 201,927 practicing dentists in 2022. It was a net add of 810 doctors. Now, to give you an idea, the U.S. population during that same period grew by 2.6 million people. If you were to say all these new people had to be patients of these doctors, each doctor would get 3,200 new patients, all right, or patients total. So it's not like we have this overabundance of doctors hitting the market right now. The ADA predicts that they will. I don't know that, but it's definitely a profession that's here to stay, is my point. There's always going to be a need for it. It's just a matter of what model do you want to do it in, right? So In order to show you this concept, and again, this is a concept we've been discussing with clients for quite some time, actually since about 2013 when we started looking at the numbers, we saw the writing on the wall. So what is this opportunity? I've just showed you how there's less doctors owning practices and the profession itself isn't adding tons and tons of dentists right now. Well, this is an opportunity. We've been talking to clients for quite some time. We've seen quite a few take advantage of it. And the opportunity specifically is multiple offices. Now, I know you've heard that before and you might go, well, not a huge reveal, but there's actually a way to do it that can be wildly successful. The stars are aligning for you right now to do this, which I'll explain, but how you do it is extremely important. And this is something, again, we've been telling clients about for years and we've seen quite a few do it. So to explain, let's go back to our demographics for a second, right? So I've already gone over the younger docs. Let's talk about the docs in the 65 and over bracket again. So what are the numbers there? So you remember 84.4% of doctors 65 and over own a practice. Well, how many of these doctors are there? Right now, there's 32,106 practicing dentists in the United States, 65 and over. The average retirement age, according to the ADA for a dentist, is 67.9 years of age, 68 years old. All right. So in that bracket, there's 32,106 doctors. How many of these doctors own a practice? Well, let's go back to our original numbers. 84.4% of the doctors 65 and over own a dental practice. So what does that translate into? About 27,000 offices. Now, we have clients in this age bracket. They may practice for another 10 years. Others I know are looking at, phasing out, selling their office, etc. So what that tells you is over the next 5 years or so, you're going to have a lot of dental practices hitting the market. And the same thing in the 55 to 64 year bracket, those practices, not all of them, some of those docs will retire early, some will work for, another 20 years. And, look, to each his own, right? But I'm just saying you're going to have a lot more of these folks selling their offices than in the 30-year-old bracket, okay? There's going to be a lot of these practices hitting the market. In the 55 to 64-year-old bracket, you've got essentially 90% of these practices are owned, which is 36,000 practices. There's 40,000 dentists in that bracket. So you've got essentially tons and tons of dental practices, which should be filtering into the market over the next, 5, 10, 15 years. So you might say, well, corporate's just going to gobble all of these up, right? Well, not true. The average corporate target, because we've seen this, right? We stay on top of this stuff, folks. The average corporate target is doing at least $100,000 a month. They don't want to practice doing $500 a year or $40,000 a month. They want a bigger office. It needs to have volume. Usually they want it doing more, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million a year. Because corporate's, operating basis is not to go scale an office. They don't do that. They're not going to come buy your $30,000 office and scale it up to 100. They're not interested. They want the bigger office that they can buy and add specialties to continue to increase revenues. That's what they need. So I guarantee you out of these 27,000 practices in the 65 year and over demographic, a majority of these are probably not corporate targets. So who's going to buy these practices? Well, this is where we're talking to our clients. You should buy them and have multiple offices. All right. So there's going to be tons of these. Now, the key with this though, right? The key with this is you have to know how to scale. If you don't know how to scale your initial personal office, then you're going to have problems with multiple practices. And this is where with an MGE client, and this may sound a bit self-assured or whatever, but I can tell you this is a reality. The average MGE client has already proved they can scale because they've scaled their own office. They've gone from 30 to 300 a month or, 45 to 130, right? They've already scaled their own practice. So that prospect does not scare them. They already know how to market. They know how to sell. They know how to manage. They know how to find good staff. So then they just have to do it again. It's not like they're walking into territory they've never trod on before. They've done this, right? So that is something that you have to know how to do. Now, learning how to do that is not difficult, which I'll talk a bit later about in the episode. But if you're looking for these offices to buy, and again, if you're an MGE client, you may have heard this or you may not have, in which case we'll talk about that as well. But if you're looking for an office to buy, what kind of office are you looking for? You are not looking to compete with corporate. If you're competing with corporate for a $2 million office, I would tell you that's a huge mistake. The office you're looking for is a smaller practice, 3 to 5 chairs. Maybe it's doing 2 to 400,000 a year, maybe 5. Right? Because you're going to buy these offices and you scale them. This has a lot of advantages. Number one, there's tons of upside. You buy this office doing $300 a month. Maybe it's a doc who is looking to retire and they're working 2-3 days a week. That is easy to scale like right now, right? And it's not going to cost you a lot. The dental office valuation formula has always been about 70%, maybe a little less if the equipment is older and a little more if it's newer. That's been the valuation, 70% of last year's collections. So if you're buying an office doing $500,000, then that it collected 500 last year, you're normally paying $350,000. And that's for everything. That's the usual valuation method. It could be a little higher or lower depending on which office you're buying. Now, I know it's a little bit different in Canada, if I have any Canadian listeners specifically looking at this strategy, but that's been the method in the United States. Now, when you start getting these bigger offices, 4 or 5 million, that's a whole different valuation method that the DSOs do, et cetera. But that's not what we're looking for here. We're looking for a smaller practice, right? The other advantage of this is you've got, let's say, your main office. Well, that's the office you're going to build up to, 2, 3, 4, 500 a month. That's your main office. This is your home base. That's fine. That's your office. Well, now you're buying a satellite office. What we don't want is some satellite office with this humongous overhead. So we feel like we have, we're always in danger, right? We're always going to be threatened with a bad month. Because if you have an office, let's say you're doing 300 a month and you buy that second office for, $350 and it's doing an average of 35, 40 and it has a bad month, 25, you're down $10,000. That's not catastrophic. If you're doing $500 a month and you have $200,000 a month or $200,000 a month, that's catastrophic. So we're trying to avoid a situation like that. We're not buying this big mega office, right? And there are going to be a ton of opportunities like this because the truth is the majority of practices fall into this category and they're going to be coming, folks. They're going to be out there on the market. I just saw this. And this is why it's especially advantageous for MGE clients. Just this past weekend at the owners conference, I had one client bring up that, he has a big office, does about $600 a month, and they bought a second office. And the office was averaging $30,000 a month. And he had an associate that he trained in his practice, and then he put him in this second office. And the second office, month one, did $100 and something thousand, 103 or 105,000, from 30 to 103 or 5. Month one. That's called scaling up quickly. Right? I just handed a graduation certificate to 2 clients who finished the MGE Power program that now own 5 offices. They had 1 when they got here. Our clients are using this strategy. We have another client in our local area, right, that owns 9 offices. And they just started at this 5, 6 years ago. They actually moved from up north to down here and started a bunch of offices they acquired. There are a lot of opportunities for this. So how does this marry up with this idea that younger dentists are not buying practices or are buying practices later? How does this whole growth opportunity marry up? Well, doctors under 30, less than 10% own a practice. Doctors 30 to 34, about a third own a practice, which means 2/3 don't. Now, what that does not mean is that these folks don't want to own a practice. They just don't. All right. So you could capitalize on this trend. Rather than them going to work for the DSO, they should come work for you. Now, how would you capitalize on this? It really is situational and it depends. And it really depends on the skill level of the associate. Maybe they've been out for a few years. Maybe they're a new graduate. But again, it depends on how this doctor practices, which I leave up to you to verify. But what would I do and what we've been recommending? You incorporate these younger doctors maybe into your office first. They work for you for a while, which is great for the younger doc because here's a mentorship type situation, right? With the potential for future partnership because you're going to put them in this second office with the idea that there's potential for partnership down the line. Okay. Now they can own an office. Now there's a few things about this. I'm just going to say them now, because it's probably the most avoidable situation I've seen with associate doctors, but I've seen it blow up so many times. It's something that you should probably address early on. You'll see the owner doctor hires an associate with the potential to go into partnership at a later date. The specifics aren't well discussed. They just talk about the idea of wouldn't it be cool if things work out to be partners. So about 6 months later, things are working out. The associate approaches the owner doc and says, hey, I think it's time to have that partnership conversation now. Well, the owner doctor doesn't think it is because this is all, subjective. No one's really put anything in writing. And now things start to get weird. The owner doctor was thinking a year, the associate was thinking 6 months, and now it gets weird. And I've seen a lot of associateships blow up as a result of that with the associate going off somewhere else. So if you're going to do something like this where you want to put somebody into a situation where partnership is a potential, spell it out in the beginning. I'm not saying to make them a partner in the beginning, but you bring them in, you go, look, we're going to work together for X period, 6 months, a year. And after that time, we decide if we're going to go ahead or we're not. You can always end it earlier if you want to, too, if it's not working out. But let's say 6 months pass and you go, yeah, this associate's pretty cool. solid, guy or girl. I think they're doing a great job. So now the partnership talks begin. And the partnership talks should also be spelled out ahead of time. Let's say you brought somebody in, they worked in your practice for a couple months, and then you've put them into your satellite office with the idea that after, a year, partnership would be on the table. Well, I'm going to just give you my own take on this because this is an interesting problem or situation because I've seen this done both ways. And I kind of, I can only look at this as to how would I want to be treated, which is generally how I try to be in business. I try to treat someone else the way I would want to be treated. So you've put this associate into a practice that, let's say you bought this office for $300,000. Let's say you bought it for $300,000. You put them in this practice and they get this practice up to $1 million after a year. So you bought it for $300,000. This practice is now doing $1 million. Now, based on the old valuation formulas that are still in use, that practice is worth $700,000. So it went from being worth $300,000 to $700,000. So if this associate wants to buy 50%, they would have to pay at the $700,000 price. They'd have to pay $350,000, as opposed to you bought it for $300,000. If they bought it at $300,000 price, they'd pay $150,000. Now, I think them paying half of what you paid is unfair because, you took all the risk, you bought the office, etc. But what I would do, I'd probably split the difference. Now, this may be completely wrong. I'm just giving you my own, my own thoughts on the subject. So let's say you bought it for $300,000 and now the place is worth $7,000 because of your associate's hard work. Well, then you split the difference. You had a lift of $400,000. It went up by $400,000 as far as practice value. So then you go, okay, you're going to get, if you want to buy half this office, we're going to say it's worth $500,000. So they're going to give you $250,000 for half the office. They already make money from day one. You made some extra money as a result of this. You almost got paid for half the practice, what you bought the practice for initially. And now you got a partner. Now you got a partner, which is even cooler. Here's somebody you can work with. You spend a year with them. You really like them. You get along. You don't have major disagreements. But this is the type of stuff you want to spell out before they even start. Doesn't mean you have to do it, but you spell it out. Look, after a year, we're going to have this conversation, and if the practice is going to be purchased, this is going to be the price, and blah, 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 blah. Because obviously someone could go, well, then they're not going to get the numbers up because then they're going to pay more. Well, if they're not getting the numbers up, you're going to find another associate. They're not going to even make it through the 6 months to a year of the trial period, right? Because I've seen it done both ways, where you pay half of what I paid for it or you pay half of what it's worth now. And I think this is the best balance between the two of them because the associate gets a little something as a result, and so do you. You make a little bit of extra money, and you still own 50% of a practice that's running on its own without you having to be there. So you have that opportunity there. And then you can replicate this over and over and over again. You bring in, because again, you're looking for a specific kind of doctor here. You're not looking for somebody who just wants to work for somebody else forever. That person can stay working for corporate or stay an associate somewhere. You're looking for somebody who at least has an idea that they want to own a practice. That's the person we're looking for. And there are a lot of these docs out there. They just haven't been put into the opportunity where they could. And again, obviously, when I brief MGE clients on this strategy that they've been doing, they do not have trouble scaling, right? They're organized, they can sell, they can market, etc. So if you're not a client, this is something you're going to want to learn or know, or it can be a bit of a mess. If you're already having trouble with location 1, the idea of adding location 2 probably isn't that exciting. It's like, why do I need 2 headaches? So, but the good news is it does not take long to learn how to scale. All right. So if you're an MGE client and you missed, I went over some of this stuff. Obviously, I went over a lot more because it was a live presentation. This owners conference this past week, call, and you want to get it, start doing this, call Chris or Sabri, and they can kind of get you going on this. If you're not an MGE client, we're happy to help you with this. You can give us a call, or you can have a link on the episode webpage that you can click for our free consultation and expansion plan to get yourself going. But ultimately, we're looking at, we have a window here. We have a window of time. Again, I can't predict the future, but this window is open for the next maybe 10, 12 years, at least 10 years, I think it's open for, where you can really take advantage of these current trends in the industry. So if it's something that you really want to do, I recommend that you do it. All right, folks, that's all I have for you this week. I hope that wasn't too long. There's a lot to talk about. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to find out when new ones come out, make sure you subscribe to us or follow us depending on the podcast platform that you're listening to. And if you need anything or you want help with this or anything else with your office, you can always contact us here at MGE at 800-640-1140 or go find us online at mgeonline.com. Again, thanks for listening. I do appreciate you listening. I appreciate your feedback, and we'll talk to you next week.